War is always plenty of stories of bravery, heroism, valor, and some of the biggest moments in history were born from the battlefields of war. Unfortunately, it is also littered with bizarre stories about monsters and creatures as sinister and scary as any enemy. From an alleged dinosaur to an evil entity, these are 7 creepy monsters seen in wartime, Part 2. Number 7. Mothman. Something strange and even violent happened during the Russian Crimean War, which lasted from 1854 to 1856. It was a military conflict in which Russia lost to an alliance made up of the Ottoman Empire, the UK, Sardinia, and France. Amid all of the fierce fighting and death, a very bizarre report of some sort of flying monster was found. During a lull in fighting, a group of Russian soldiers decided to attack on their enemy, with whom they had arranged a tense 24-hour truce. However, they wouldn't get very far with their plan. As they crept closer to the enemy camp, the men realized that in the air above them, there soared an enormous flying, crow-like entity with the wings of a bat and which was described as not having any discernible head. But they continued on their mission. Some minutes later, for some reason, the soldiers had become disoriented and were actually headed back towards their camp, where they were mistaken for the enemy and gunned down by friendly fire. Just one of them lived to tell such a tale. As years passed by, the account has been changing, but one very interesting theory about what was seen that night remains, and it is that this was a Mothman, a large flying man with 10-foot wings. Whatever happened out there on that battlefield, it remains an intriguing mystery among all of the tales of battle. Number 6. Mosaur. Years later, we come to World War I, a period of which produced a few very compelling accounts of mystery creatures. On July 30th, 1915, a British steamer called the Iberian and the German U-boat U-28 started a battle in the North Atlantic. The steamer was chased down and destroyed with torpedoes and shells, and it began to sink. As it did, there was reportedly a huge underwater explosion aboard the doomed vessel. The massive detonation sent a shower of foamy water and debris into the air, as well as something altogether bizarre beyond reason. According to the U-28's captain and 7 other crew members, a strange creature was ejected out of the water. It was described as being somewhat similar to a crocodile in general body shape, with a long tapered head and measuring about 20 meters, 65 feet in length. The creature apparently came back down to the water but was still alive, although obviously grievously wounded. Cryptozoologists have pointed to the fact that the creature described sounds very much like an enormous prehistoric marine reptile called a mosasaur. It will probably remain a mystery, as all of the witnesses are dead and the only records we have are the logbook and the official reports. Number 5. The Hound of Mons. Another interesting tale registered during the World War I is that of the Hound of Mons. TheTopMan, a researcher, was in charge of writing the article which tells our next story, which took place on the battlefield of Mons, Belgium in 1914. The whole terrifying incident began with a Captain Yeskies and 4 men of the London Fusiliers. One night he decided to carry out a patrol of the area, but none returned. This was not strange, as this was a bloody battle during such a war, and to go missing was something common. Yet when the bodies of the men were found several days later, it was discovered that something had ripped their throats out and that the corpses were covered with teeth marks. One night a few days after this, it was reported that soldiers from both sides heard an ear-piercing, monstrous howl emanating from the desolate darkness of no man's land. The unearthly nighttime roars also increased in frequency, and it was around this time that some of the soldiers along no man's land reported seeing an enormous gray hound walking out the shadows and with glowing eyes. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the hound was gone and the attack ceased. But this story could have its explanation. In 1919, it was reported that the creature had been the result of a scientific experiment carried out by a German doctor named Gottlieb Hochmuller for the purpose of inserting the brains of a madman into a Siberian wolfhound to be used as a weapon of war. Whether this is a piece of war folklore or has elements of truth to it, we will probably never know. And the Hellhound of Mons remains a mysterious tale buried in history. Number 4. Crocodile. Now let's jump into the American Civil War. One of the weirdest tales of mystery monsters to come out of this war is that of a strange creature known as the Crocodingo, an animal with the body of a dingo and the head of a crocodile. Legends of this strange beast has been around for years, but Hank Lemon, a local from Huntsville, Tennessee, offered a testimony quite interesting. According to the eyewitness, on the night of July 31, 1839, a strange green glow was observed in the sky behind his house, and his dogs became extremely agitated at the time, barking and snarling uncontrollably. Lemon claimed that he at first took the glow to be something like the Northern Lights and came back to his house. It was then that a streak of light crashed down into the woods beyond his property, after which the glow in the sky abruptly vanished. A few minutes later, a strange creature allegedly bolted forth from the underbrush. The monster was described as having the body of a large dog, topped with a bulbous reptilian alligator-like head, complete with jagged fangs. Besides, Lemon said that there was a horrible charnel stench in the air. This was the beginning of a series of sightings between 1856 and 1860. Fishermen, farmers, and even Civil War soldiers reported seeing the creature, and they continued into the 1900s and 2000s. Theories on what the Crocodingo could be run the gamut from secret genetic engineering projects, aliens, or shapeshifters to mere misidentifications of coyotes and feral dogs. Number 3. Green Eyes. The bloody Battle of Chickamauga, fought on September 1863 between U.S. and Confederate forces in the American Civil War, was the origin of a report of a monstrous abomination that is really hard to classify. At the site of the battle, a strange creature was said to be lurking in the battlefield after the fighting, prowling and flitting amongst the dead corpses and feeding on them. Interestingly, the beast would be sighted from time to time, even long after Civil War hostilities ended. In 1981, a park ranger by the name of Edward Tenney gave an account to the author Richard Weiner, which described a rather harrowing encounter with the creature. When it passed me, I could see his hair was long like a woman's. The eyes, I'll never forget those eyes, they were glaring, almost greenish-orange in color, flashing like some sort of wild animal. The teeth were long and pointed like fangs. It was wearing a dark cape that seemed to be flapping in the wind, but there was no wind. I didn't know whether to run or scream or what. Then the headlights of an approaching car came blazing through the fog, and the thing disappeared right in front of me. Was this the same entity seen by troops feasting on corpses of the dead on battlefields during the Civil War? We will never know. Unfortunately, as in many cases of strange creatures seen during wartime, these accounts have become obscure and forgotten over time, lost to the tides of history. Number 2. Monster in Finland forests. The events took place in 1942 when Russia and Finland found themselves confronted in what is known as the Winter War. The objective of the Soviet Army was to invade Finland, and to avoid being discovered, the soldiers decided to go into a forest to initiate a strategic attack. Before starting the plan, the Russians have heard rumors about a strange creature that inhabited the Finnish forests and that mutilated people, but they ignored it and continued with their plan. On the other hand, the Finns received news about the Russian strategic attack, so they sent troops into the forest. When they arrived, they found a chilling scene. Mutilated, dismembered, and skinned bodies, the smell was very unpleasant. Unlike other related stories, this particular story does have photographic evidence that corroborates what happened there. The photograph shows the skin of a completely skinned Russian soldier hanging from a branch. As a curious fact, the Finns concealed this massacre by ensuring that it was the Russians themselves who mutilated each other because they could have run out of supplies during the mission, but it has very little credibility. Possibly they did it so as not to continue feeding the fears and imaginations of the Finns. Number 1. Submarine versus Sea Monster. Our top number 1 goes to one of the most well-known accounts of an alleged sea monster attack on a submarine during the World War I. On April 30, 1918, a British patrol boat called Coreopsis discovered a German submarine floating on the surface. At the time, the U-boats, as the German submarines were called, were a fairly novel and highly feared weapon of war, known for being invisible, deadly killers of the high seas, so it was quite a fortunate turn of events for the British to come across one. The British boat attacked the submarine, but things became even weirder when the submarine crew quickly surrendered without any resistance. Germans were brought aboard and the U-boat captain Gunther Kretsch was questioned. The man reported that the submarine had surfaced in the night because it needed to recharge its batteries. However, during which something enormous came out of the water and started climbing up the side of the ship, which had caused the whole submarine to start listing to the side. The beast was described as being enormous, with a small head with large eyes deeply set in a horned skull and a large mouth with sharp teeth that glinted in the moonlight. After an inspection of the submarine, it was determined that its gun was extremely damaged, scratched, and twisted. There had also been enough damage to the forward hull plates. What is strange is that the official report logged by the British concerning UB-85's capture makes no mention of such a creature. It has been suggested that the British Navy may have been attempting to cover up the real circumstances surrounding the incident. Perhaps the British simply did not believe the distressed German U-boat captain, or that report was a fake. We will probably never corroborate any of these creepy stories, as they are simply basic accounts from soldiers who suffered the terrible effects of war. However, we can learn another facet of the horrors of war, serving to stoke the imagination and expanding upon the history we know or think we know. Apart from these chilling and interesting stories, there are many other legends about other creatures that lurked in the dark in times of war. You can know them in the following video.